Today is day 12 and the countdown towards the Stronghold Digital Mining investor presentation continues. Now, there have been a number of developments over the past 24 hours that I do think are noteworthy. I don't know that this is the correct venue to hash through all of these developments, so I do want to at least, though, point to a couple of variables, a couple of factors that I do think will favorably impact Stronghold Digital Mining. So the most critical of these factors is that the price of Bitcoin has risen. Now, just the fact that the price of Bitcoin goes up doesn't necessarily mean that we make more money if the network hash rate rises in conjunction with those price spikes that Bitcoin may be experiencing. But as I look at the Stronghold Digital Mining dashboard, my little homemade dashboard here at the Ziner.com website, I do see that Bitcoin priced in dollars per megawatt hour are now at around $67.64. So just about 24 hours ago or so, I think that number was closer to $57. So that $10 spike in Bitcoin priced in dollars per megawatt hour, that directly impacts our ability to have a bit more of a margin as it relates to the revenue that we generate. Now, something else that I do think is noteworthy is that there is a lot of talk about at this point, three financial institutions that have essentially gone bust. Now, I'm not going to really get into all of the specific details as it relates to each of these institutions, but I do think that when you look at the big picture and you look at what is essentially a situation in which the U.S. federal government is stepping in to essentially attempt to mitigate a wider banking crisis from unfolding, that type of headline in conjunction with, the Federal Reserve indicating just a number of days ago, right, that their goal was to continue raising rates, and now it appears as if though, hey, well, maybe continuing to raise rates is something which the Federal Reserve may find politically unpalatable. Now, the Fed is supposed to at least be an independent organization that makes its own decisions in isolation from other potential influences. But let's kind of keep it real here. It's impossible to ignore what's going on in the broader financial marketplace, and arguably one of the underlying denominator variables, right, that all three of these institutions have in common, not necessarily the specific reason why they may have found themselves in the condition that they find themselves, but perhaps one could even say the proximate cause for why they find themselves this way is because, interest rates, that is, have risen precipitously over the past 12 months or so. And so this is introducing a lot of credit risk variables to banking institutions that haven't necessarily had to think about this for quite some time. So this all, I think, bodes well for Stronghold Digital Mining because it bodes well for Bitcoin. If there is a bit of a crisis in confidence as to the overall viability of the U.S. banking system, that from my perspective, is a positive catalyst for Bitcoin. Something else that bears mentioning is that when we look at the question of contagion, right? If you've been following the news, there's been a number of headlines that talk about, will federal regulators be able to contain the contagion from these financial institutions, running into difficulty? And while it may be true that aspects of contagion can be contained insofar as different, backstop mechanisms and other types of financial gymnastics, right, that can be sort of deployed and put into place to try to keep things from unraveling, there is a psychological element to what's unfolding on the news, what's unfolding on the internet, what's unfolding in social media. And for better or for worse, it does, I believe, have a corrosive effect on an individual's sort of sense of confidence in the mainstream financial system. Now, if you recall, when Bitcoin was first created, that Genesis block contained a message. And the message was a reference to a headline regarding the potential bailout of banks. So isn't it interesting? Isn't it thought-provoking that here we are, right, many, many years later, and we find ourselves once again with headlines that seem to suggest that federal authorities are prepared to bail out banks. Now, one can argue as to whether or not this is actually technically a bailout. Evidently, shareholders of these institutions and bondholders are going to be wiped out. It seems as if though the real goal here is to make depositors whole. But again, just step back for a moment and just, when you think about it from a headline perspective, I think for a lot of folks, you say, well, wait a minute, what are federal authorities doing getting mixed up with, depositors or institutions that seem to have gone under, when, right, the thinking right amongst a lot of people is, hey, well, if you have $250,000 or less in a bank that's FDIC insured, so to speak, well, hey, you get your $250,000. Anything above that's uninsured. So, whether or not this technically qualifies as a bailout, and I'm not necessarily here to argue as to the linguistics of this. The perception, though, I think does increasingly appear to be that this is a bailout, right? So when we really look at where Bitcoin has been, say, over the past 2 to 3 years, the last time Bitcoin really started firing up and moving up in price was when the Federal Reserve unleashed a tsunami of, so to speak, cheap money, right? They slashed interest rates. There were a lot of government programs. There was a lot of money sloshing around. At this juncture, right, ostensibly, the Federal Reserve is attempting to tighten monetary policy, raise interest rates. There's even talk about reducing their roughly $8 trillion balance sheet. Well, is that still going to happen if you have what amounts to the beginning of a potential banking crisis on your hands? And I think there are some observers that are suggesting that the Federal Reserve is essentially at the point of pivoting, where there may not necessarily be any more rate hikes. And as a result of problems that are only perhaps just starting to unfold within the financial system, that the Federal Reserve may find themselves having to cut interest rates. Now, none of this is arguably good if the goal is to contain inflation. On the other hand, this is phenomenal news if you're somebody who's saying, hey, it would be great if Bitcoin, rose in value. I mean, Stronghold Digital Mining essentially has 2 revenue inputs. 3 if you include the sale of beneficial use fly ash. But, let's sort of stick to the 2 main revenue streams here. The first being selling electricity to the grid, and the second, mining Bitcoin, right? So if Stronghold Digital Mining can make more money as a result of Bitcoin, going up in price, well, that's a good thing. I think an argument, of course, can be made, well, hey, if inflation is going to start running at 10, 15, 20% per year, what does that say about the overall health of, the ecosystem in which not only Stronghold Digital Mining, but really anybody here in the United States, what does that say about the environment that we're living in? That being said, it sure seems to me that it's a good thing to at least be in a position to be creating Bitcoin, right? If Bitcoin is rising in value, which will translate into more revenue, which will translate into higher adjusted EBITDA, and may even one day translate into actual earnings per share. So while it's true there are probably not a whole lot of great options in front of the Federal Reserve right now, I do think that there are, as I said before, a number of catalysts that may be aligning themselves to really help Stronghold Digital Mining potentially generate more revenue. And, if grid prices are going to be depressed for a while, then hey, it's to our advantage if Bitcoin prices start to elevate. So let's see how things unfold. The countdown continues. Today's day 12, tomorrow's day 13. We're going to create a piece of content like this every single day until we get that investor presentation. I'm really, really excited to hear what happened in Q4 2022. I'm even more excited, as I'm sure you are as well, right, to get a little bit of that context and color as to what's going on right now. Because what's going on right now is very, very interesting. Okay, you have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow.